In this video, I'll show you how to install a full Python environment on Windows. Hi, my name is Vincent and I'm a finance professor at HEC Montreal. For the past 4 years, I've been teaching students how to use Python for finance research. In this video, I'll guide you through the simplest way I know of installing a full Python environment. In order to use Python, you'll need 3 things. First, you'll need Python, the interpreter, to execute your code. You'll also need a package manager. For that, I'll use UV, and a code editor. For that, we'll use Visual Studio Code. The first component we'll install is a package manager. You might have heard of Anaconda, which for data science was king in the past. That's what I used for a while, but now it's gone. It's too slow. Last year, I was recommending to use Poetry, but now there is something even better, UV. So why do we want to use UV? Well, for a lot of things. First of all, UV will let you install and manage different Python versions on your computer. It will also replace a lot of tools like pip, Poetry, Python that lets you create, manage virtual environment and install different third-party packages. We want to use it because it's much faster than all the alternatives. And it's gained a lot of traction in the last year because it lets you do things like running scripts without pre-installing the dependencies. And it's also very good for managing project dependencies, especially if you're working with collaborators. But to be honest, the biggest selling point is that UV is fast. To install UV, we'll first head to Astral's website. So Astral is the company behind UV, and we'll look at the documentation for UV. And in the documentation, we'll copy the command for the installation for Windows. So this command will need to be executed in PowerShell. So first copy the command, and then let's open PowerShell. And in PowerShell, just paste the installation command and enter. Once the installation is complete, all you have to do is copy the command that's listed after the installation confirmation for PowerShell. So just copy that and paste it again. Now that's it. UV should be working. We can check that it is installed by typing UV -- version, and everything looks good. Next, we'll create a sandbox environment. So for me, it's an environment that's always available when I want to test something quickly, so nothing tied to a project. So for that, I'll call it sandbox. Just create a new folder called sandbox, right-click, and then open in PowerShell. And to create a new UV project, all you have to do is type UV init. Once we're done, the project has been initialized. So if we look at the files, we see that UV created a few files, including the pyproject.toml, which is the file that contains the dependencies of the projects. Right now, there's no dependencies except the Python version. Next, we'll add some dependencies so that we have all the packages that we need when we want to quickly explore some data. So we'll add pandas, numpy, scipy, matplotlib, and a few more, using UV add and then the list of the packages that we want. Make sure to install Jupyter if you want to use Jupyter notebooks. The first time you use UV to create a big environment, it might take a bit more time because UV has to download all the packages that you need. But once you've done that once, then every subsequent time, UV will be super fast because it's cached all your packages. So you can create a new environment with the same packages and it's going to be fine. We can check that UV can run Python and has the proper environment by just typing UV run Python. It will open a Python environment. And now if I try to import a package that we've just installed, such as pandas, we can see that it can be imported and everything seems to work. Okay, so we've got Python installed. Now we just need a code editor so that we can write and run code. And for that, we'll use Visual Studio Code, which is the most popular editor for Python, but it's actually not a Python editor. It's just a code editor, which is extensible with extension, and that's what we'll use for Python. It is a software that's developed by Microsoft, but they made it open source, so it is free to use, and there are some different forks. We'll go and download it at visualstudio.com. Visual Studio Code is not the only game in town. So these days I use Cursor a lot, which is a fork of VS Code. So it's kind of just a derivatives of Visual Studio Code, which has been enabled by kind of deep integration with AI. But for beginners, what I really recommend is just to start with Visual Studio Code. To install Visual Studio Code, all you have to do is head to code.visualstudio.com, download and install like you would any other app, or you can also install it from the Microsoft Store just by searching for Visual Studio Code. Once we're done installing, we'll open Visual Studio Code, and we'll first start by opening a folder. So Visual Studio Code works based on folders, so it's going to treat any folder that you open as a project. So we'll just open the sandbox environment that we've created earlier. The first time you open a folder, VS Code was going to ask you whether you want to trust the authors of the file in the folder. This is really important because you're going to be running code, and code can be dangerous if it's malicious. So in this case, I'm going to accept and trust because that's my code, but be careful with this. So we can look at the different files that were created. The pyproject.toml file is just a description of the project, including the dependencies, the packages that are supported. There is a README file, which is empty in this case. The UV log file is the file that contains all the version details of all the packages that were installed. The .python version file defines the Python version that's going to be used by the project. And the .venv folder is the folder that contains the environment, so all the packages that were installed for this project. UV will also create a simple main.py file that contains just a hello world example. So if we open this file in Visual Studio Code, because it is a Python script, VS Code is going to ask us if we want to install the Python extensions so that we can actually have all the nice Python related feature in VS Code. So we'll click yes. And in addition to that, we'll make sure that we also install Jupyter so that we can run Jupyter Notebook in the interactive window. So now if we go back to our main.py file, we can make sure that it's running the proper environment by clicking on the Python version on the bottom right corner and selecting our .venv environment. And now if we run the file, we can see that it executes properly in the terminal below. So Python scripts are working properly. Next, we'll open the interactive window to make sure that is working properly as well. So for that, we'll go into the command palette. that you can also open with F1, and we'll search for Jupyter Create Interactive Window. And this will open an interactive window. You might get a warning like this. When you run Jupyter, it is network-based, so even though it's running locally, Windows will want you to make sure that you allow it, so you should. And then here, well, you can make sure again that we're using the proper environment by clicking on the top right corner, making sure that we've got the proper .venv environment. And we can check that everything is working properly by doing a simple command, 1+1. Everything seems to be working fine. Before we finish, I just want to show you how to create new files in Visual Studio Code. So for Python scripts, so .py files, you can just go on the sidebar and create a new file. You just have to name it .py, and this is just a new Python script. If you want to create a Jupyter notebook, you'll have to go back in the command palette and use Jupyter create new Jupyter notebook. You cannot create it like a simple script because notebooks have some metadata behind it, so you really have to use the command like this. Then you can save it. So I'll call it notebook. And once we're done, we can make sure that it works. We have to select our kernel. We'll select our current environment. And we can run a simple command to make sure that it works. Everything's working well, so we're all good. We've got now a fully working Python environment.